So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome today to the D3SM seminar. Thank you for joining us both in person and online. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce the initiative, so D3SM behind this series. So it's the Douglas Data and Digital Science for Mental Health. It wants to advance innovation in mental health care through the responsible use of data and digital technologies. It brings together researchers, clinicians, policy partners, and people with lived experience to strengthen infrastructure, governance, and collaboration so that the research can be better informed through practice. So the seminar series creates a space for shared learning and dialogue across disciplines. Today's presentation will be in English. The seminar will be recorded and accessible via the Douglas Research Center YouTube channel. Online participants can submit questions in the chat during the talk, and we will also take questions from the room at the end or during at the end.
During's good.
Okay, and during as well. Just a note, there will be a scientific series event at the St. Mary's Research Center via Teams as well, so it will be hybrid. It will align as well with today's topic. It will be on March 12 at noon, and it will be presented by Alisa B. Rudd from McGill Libraries. And the title will be Putting FAIR into Practice, Managing Research Data from Data Collection to Responsible Sharing, for those of you that are interested. So before we get started, a quick note regarding our next D3SM event. So we'll have a D3SM day that will be on March 20th. It will be a full day event bringing together our community to celebrate innovation and digital and data-driven mental health research. So you can also find all the details on our website, d3sm.ca. So we are very pleased to welcome our speakers. So we have Gabriel Devenyi, so that leads the DNP, the Douglas Neuroinformatics Platform, architecting the software, platforms, and infrastructure of the DMP, including the OpenDataCapture platform and the DataBank, and an extensive high-performance computing infrastructure. And we have Cian as well, that is a scientific programmer at the CoBrA Lab and DNP. Oh, and Gabe as well is part of the CoBrA Lab. And yeah, Cian is part of CoBrA Lab and DNP, where he writes and maintains scientific software, runs neuroimaging analysis and HPCs as well, and provide user support. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Good afternoon, everybody. So today we're going to go through what one way to describe this is an opinionated set of recommendations on how to build a data management plan. So we're going to start off with, what are we talking about when we talk about a data management plan? Well, it all starts off from this policy statement from the tri-agency being NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR. That is the social sciences research, the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the health research. And the key component here is that agencies require data management plans to be submitted to the appropriate agency at the time of application as outlined in the call for proposals. And in these cases, data management plans will be considered in the adjudication process. Okay, so this is very important for any kind of researchers. That means that you have to be able to demonstrate good stewardship from collection to end of study for data you collect. And what we're going to go over is what guidance looks like for what they've provided on data management plans. And then we're going to shift gears and look at some practical guidance, because data management plans are more about policy first. And we're going to provide you with some insight into how to use this to your advantage so that you can get more research done, because that's also important. All right. So we're going to start with, what does the guidance look like from McGill and Digital Research Alliance Canada on how to write a data management plan or a data management policy? Well, first of all, the components. You need to document data collection, the documentation around data collection and all these things. So yes, you need to document the documentation. That's a part of the process. Your data storage and backups, your data preservation strategy for long-term access, provisions for sharing and reuse, and ethical and legal compliance. So that's the top level description that comes from the data management policy care of the Tri-Council. So these are the things you need to be able to include. So that's what the Tri-Council tells you you need. That's what they say. And that's a pretty broad set of instructions. Now, what happens if we go and look at Digital Research Alliance or McGill? What do they say about how to build these things? Okay. Well, first, for data management, data collection, they say things like, what instruments will you use to collect your data? What formats will the data be collected in? What metadata will you collect? What procedure will you follow? How will you transfer data from instrument to centralized storage? So we're starting off with, you need to think about how you're collecting data. That's what they want you to think about to start. But this is the guidance they provide for the most part. It's, you need to think about these questions. And there's a form where you can fill out various things about that. But this is where the recommendations end, is think about these things. Okay? Storage and backup. You need to think about where you will store the data. Who will have access? What backups considerations will be made? Do this have ethical and legal compliance issues? Do you need to think about like the type of data you're collecting? How does that interact with where the storage can be stored? You need to document the process. What are the data formats? How you organize the data formats? How will you name everything? Again, these are all questions that you need to answer as part of setting things up. I haven't told you anything about how to do any of this. This is the guidance that's generally provided is you need to think about all these things and write them down. Who is and will be responsible for that? Data preservation. So now you've got to the end of the study, reuse, all those types of things. What do you need to think about there? What will happen after the project is done? Will it continue to be stored? Will it be migrated to longer storage? Will it be uploaded to a repository? If you look back to the data management policy, actually there's strong encouragements that all data be released in some kind of repository, if at all possible. Of course, that interacts with the ethical legal components of whether or not you can actually do that. They just say, should be done for reuse. Is anonymization required as part of that? Should some data be withheld because it's personally identifying, anything like that? Who decides? Or require extra permissions? That's often the thing. So you would have open data versus an open data. These are the things that you need to ask. Should the data be decimated? Can you take high resolution data, like where somebody lives, and reduce the precision of it, and then release the reduced precision data? Or will it all be deleted? Because there are certainly, if you go and look at old data management policies, there was an era where the data management policy as required by ethics boards is often, you need to delete it when you're done, or you need to delete it after N years after you're done. And that was kind of this dark age when the computers had just started and data sharing wasn't really a thing, and the data management policy of the Tri-Council hadn't happened yet, requiring release. So you need to know those kinds of things. Have you tracked all the copies? How many copies of them? Who works with UK Biobank? You know that they send out regular messages saying this user has decided to withdraw all their data from the study. How many copies of that data exist out there, and who's controlling whether or not they've been removed? Right? That kind of thing has to happen. So that's a requirement on their end, and that's a requirement on your end for the data. Okay. And was consent provided? Did you actually set things up? You know, you have to sort all that out. Or were there varying levels of consent? Did they consent to the original study, but they didn't consent to data reuse, for example? Because sometimes ethics wants you to ask those kinds of questions. So all that needs to be tracked, and you need to have that all sorted out in theory before you run a study. That's the whole principle of the data management plan and how you have to submit it beforehand. Millar, has there been a grant application that's required a data management policy yet?
Not at the Tri-Council.
Not at the Tri-Council level. So they're still kind of threatening it, right? Because it's actually in the policy that it may be required for a study. But at some point, you may have to have all that planned out ahead of time. So, yes.
Do any of these institutions provide any sort of guidance outside of these like Just bullet list.
Some of them, so the best I've seen is the MUHC has an OK document that covers how to name some things. And what they have usually is something like what I'm covering here in a PDF document you can read. That is a bunch of questions, and they may have a template form where you can fill out some parts of it. The problem with all of these is that this is a very broad set of questions, and it doesn't make recommendations on what the best practices are for any of this. So you're thinking now, the rest of this presentation is going to end up trying to give some opinionated suggestions on what the best choices are for some of these things, while being very broad, because I know there's a bunch of neuroimages here, but I don't know who's necessarily online. But we're going to keep it to the kind of broad sets of suggestions of how to make choices about storing data, about having a data management. Finally, ethics and legal. So which laws apply to your data, right? This depends on where you collect it, where you store it, what kind of people they are. You know, you should be aware that there are special considerations for the Indigenous peoples of Canada that are different, that actually cut through a lot of these things and actually impose rules that are different than the general rules. You know, psychiatric populations, those are all different things. And that's interaction between the legal system and the ethics board at one or more places, depending on how you're running your study as well. Multi-site studies, like I know Lonnie is going to be doing. Different places, different ethics rules. Okay. What is defined as personally identifying data? Do you know what's personally identifying and what's not? The law versus what the ethics board says. Those are different things sometimes. Where can it be stored? All that kind of stuff. Can you distribute raw data? Can you distribute derived data if you can't distribute raw data? Are there restrictions on distribution? Right, so you know that you can't actually release UK Biobank derived data or at least not derived from the neuroimaging data directly, that kind of thing. What's to be done at the end. So that kind of interacts with the data, you know, the long-term stewardship component of the data. This comes in and ultimately makes a lot of those decisions for you. But you have to ask all those when you're planning the study out. Okay, what about answers for these questions? That's a whole bunch of questions. And, you know, you have to write a policy, supposedly. Does anybody ever check your work, right? Who are you submitting to? As we just said, like the Tri-Council doesn't necessarily look at those things right now. So why don't we take the opportunity to use this planning process to make good decisions about how we'll handle the data? Yes, Laura.
I think the Wellcome Trust office for this kind of stuff, very, very.
Other funding bodies do.
And then I
Right.
think chief staff are very. When I used to apply the very excited. So it's not, no, it's not because it's not happening in Canada.
Right.
It's coming for us.
Yeah, I expect fully at some point that that's going to be asked. And you could answer all these questions in reasonable ways that a funding body might be happy with it. But that's not what I'm talking about here today. I want to talk about how to answer these questions in a way that when you go to do the study and do the analysis and write the papers, that the data is easy to use to do science. Because that's my primary goal here, is doing science. So we want to answer these questions in the effective ways. Okay. Some opinionated answers on these questions. Okay, so first of all, Tri-Council doesn't bother to define things. So let's define some terms here. First of all, what is data? Data is raw data, the stuff you collect, right? From a machine, from DICOMs, microscope images, paper tests, responses on a digital questionnaire. That's all data, right? The raw stuff that you get from the participant, from the mouse, from any time where you're writing down numbers or things that could be conceivably like conceived of as numbers, as, you know, categorical things and so on and so forth. Okay. Curated data. This is the stuff you're actually going to use. It might be converted and organized. So the raw data is often not what you analyze, right? You don't directly analyze DICOMs, although most groups don't directly. You convert them to MINC or to NIFTY, or something like that. You convert the proprietary microscope image into the OME TIFF format or something, all those kind of things. You convert the proprietary responses. You take the paper tests and you code them into some digital format, right? The paper test is the raw data, but you don't analyze the paper test directly. You do curated data. And we'll talk a lot more about curated data. Calculations. So do you sum something and then that's actually the number you care about, even though you might have 15 answers, you actually care about a sum, something like that. Curated data. Okay, that's the stuff you analyze. Derived measures, things like models, the stuff that comes out of your analysis is still data, right? Summary statistics, all that kind of stuff. The code you use to interact with this is data as well. We wanted to think about a holistic interpretation of a study and all the things you do. It's all data. Derived measures produced by the code. So this is, analysis, this is figures. That all should be thought about in terms of a management process. So now when I say data, I actually mean all of this. And the recommendations are talking about all of this. One more big thing. Metadata is important data too. So that's something that is not described very often, is that metadata is actually super important. Metadata is the data about data. What does that mean? Important for tracking the stability of data collection. Who, when, how, the machine, the serial number, the time, who is the operator. If you're doing mouse experiments, you should know that a male versus a female experimenter actually has an effect on mice. There are publications on this, right? Same thing as if you were just doing a questionnaire with a participant. There's potential interactions there that you should log. All that kind of thing. Standard operating procedures, how you actually run the study, how you run the questionnaire and everything. That is data that is relevant from a scientific perspective. It's metadata about the study. How is it all collected? Were there deviations from procedure? Now we're talking about like individual experiments. You run the DICOM, you do your MRI data collection, and you have to collect the structural data twice because the participant moved the first time. There's a note associated with that. That note is metadata about the study. That tells you something about that participant and that process. You should keep it. You should store it appropriately. Okay. Was the data manually changed, right? If you have to do like corrections or something like that, there's a note that should be collected associated with something like that. Okay. A little more nomenclature. Data set. So we hear a bunch of different terms, and this is what I'm going to pretend that these things are. Data and metadata, the things coming together. Okay. Database. Lots of people mix up data sets and databases. A database is a highly structured set of data which you can then query small pieces out of. So you have 10 million lines of data, and you want to pull out 5 subjects. You want to pull out just age 25 or something like that. A database is set up to achieve that kind of stuff effectively. It's highly structured. It's all cleaned up and curated. It usually has software underlying it. It's not a file. It's not a CSV file. It's not an Excel file. It's not something like that. It's software. And you have to talk to it with an API. It might have a web or a GUI interface on top of that. That is separate from the database. That is the front end to the database. So just be aware that people might throw around these terms a little bit more loosely. But this is like, definitionally, these are different things. Okay? Data dictionary or schema. The names of all the variables. This is a metadata component. This has the names of all the variables. This has the units. This has the allowed values or ranges for something. So this describes the set of data you have, that you could give it to somebody else and say, even if they don't have the data, say, I understand what it is that you have. You've collected these things. Repository, a place for data to be deposited and retrieved. And that could be a database. That could be just a thing that stores a bunch of files. It could be a web page. It could be any other things, a data repository. Versioning, tracking changes made to data or code. So the idea that you can see the differences between one version and another. And provenance, documenting the origin of the data and all steps done to it to get an output. You can do that manually. You can do that automatically. But that's a concept that you should think about in this process. Okay, data collection and raw data. Raw data is often in proprietary formats. It's structured in per measure. You collect from this thing, from that thing. They're all separate stuff. Okay, set up a standard for naming and organizing that, right? The machine might give you some naming scheme that isn't particularly good. Have an SOP that when you collect it, you automatically rename it and put it in the right place. Have a procedure in place for those kinds of things. Name it, organize it, put it in one place. This is not about conversion or modification yet. This is just about organizing the raw data, right? Know what metadata is automatically included. So in a DICOM, an MRI, almost everything about the data collection is actually already there inside the DICOMs, except who did it, like who was in the room and so on. So there's some things that you might want to log anyways. But other things like ultrasonic vocalizations of a mouse, you just get, a flat text file with a bunch of numbers. You should write down the other settings that you had to do elsewhere on the machine if you have to tune them. That kind of stuff. You should know that. Or if you're taking a weight, which scale, what serial number, all that kind of stuff. Okay, record anything that's not automatically included. Track mistakes. If you had to do it more than once, if you had to fix something, if something seemed weird, write it down. Metadata, because you might want to use that piece of information later on. Use as few collection tools as possible. So if you have to do questionnaire stuff, don't use SurveyMonkey and Google Docs and Loris and ODC and REDCap, because the hardest part about then reconciling this, which will be our next step, is that the 5, 6, 7 different things, because we've definitely run into that before. Okay, raw data 2. Choose appropriate variable names and types. So if you have a choice to control anything, pick appropriate types. Use non-numerics for not a number. They should stand out as being obviously different. NA, NAND, N/A, something like that. That's what not data means when you don't have it. Not -99999 SPSS users. That's still a number. People can miss that. Use a sensible null value. So use null, or if the data set you have actually supports null, use null. Don't use blank field, because when you look at the data, it's hard to tell the difference between a single space and a true blank. So write something that's meaningful instead. Don't store categories as numbers. MF, male, female, not 1, 0, because I can get 1, 0 wrong, right? If I don't have the data dictionary, or if I make a coding mistake or something, I don't know which is which. There are standards for all of this stuff, which if you're using something specific, but these are all general recommendations. Prevent entry errors by having used good collection tools. Validate at entry, right? So use something that prevents you from typing in the wrong thing, that prevents you from mistyping, that prevents you from providing a number that is not meaningful. You should not be able to put 1,000 kilograms for a weight in. That's not meaningful, right? So you can actually limit what a sensible set of ranges is before you put the data. Everything you do there means higher quality data. Use self-documenting date formats. Use the ISO format. The American and the Canadian/British systems, is it month, day, year, or day, month, year? Well, there's a whole bunch of dates in the middle there that are kind of, it could be either one. But if you do year, month, day, you don't have that problem. Also, you have from biggest to smallest. You get to if you sort things and so on, it's nice. Document the formats and allowed expected values. So that's build the schema, build the data dictionary, describe everything that's valid, right? And so you can check against the schema. There are always technical solutions for all of this, but I'm avoiding describing specific technical solutions to this because I want it to be broadly accessible as possible. All of this is done just by process and procedure and thinking about it ahead of time. But we can offer lots of technical solutions to improve on all of this. Collect using specialized software as much as possible, right? Use OpenDataCapture. It, of course, checks all these boxes because that's why we built it. Use REDCap. You have to set all that up yourself if you do it, right? You can do a lot of these things, but it's not going to hold your hand in quite the same way and have everything automatically just work. You have to do it yourself. You have to learn how to do it yourself. Okay. Quick thing about, yes, Matt. I will repeat the question. So the question from Matt is about qualitative research or semi-quantitative research, anything where you have kind of structured interviews. Well, the first thing is, of course, is you should document who does it, right? So if it's different individuals are running some of the data collection versus others, you should write all that kind of stuff down, right? Now, I'm going to push towards a technical solution for this as well and say, you should record those, right? You should have an audio recording of that. You should do automatic transcription because now we have machine learning tools to do that all really effectively. And now you've got something that is much more data-like. I realize there are complications from ethics and all that if you for a study, but that would be my first recommendation is that. I am not an expert in the structured interview process for those kinds of things, but my understanding is that there's a significant amount of training involved to make sure that it is as standardized as possible. So that means that actually has to happen properly, right? And there shouldn't be huge amounts of deviations. And so things should be comparable approximately for that. But I would push towards making things as quantitative as possible. And that actually means recording stuff. Okay. But quick thing about file and directory names. So this is going to be the way that is most effective and easiest for organizing stuff is just picking good names for everything, right? So quick do's and don'ts for naming. So this is the one place where I think the MUHC recommendations for data management have some good stuff. They actually give some recommendations. I agree with them. I'm just going to cover the same kind of topics, but you should look at their stuff. Okay. This is the minimum viable organization scheme. Files and directories. There are standards for some sets of data like BIDs, which you should definitely use, but in general, you should just think about naming things consistently. Do's, use an ISO date out in front because that allows you to sort stuff by time and you get automatically longitudinal data when you're naming things. Use a subject ID that includes letters and numbers. This is important because then if you have data in a spreadsheet later on, you don't accidentally get number conversion when you load it in, right? So you have sub 001, you don't have 001 because some tools will convert 001 to 1. And now it doesn't match anymore accidentally. That depends on the tool, all those things, but an easy way to avoid that is to have those kind of mixed types so that that conversion can't happen. Okay. Use underscores, periods, hyphens to separate words, right? Use a consistent separator that if you have the date and the subject and the data type and other things that are associated with it, stick them in the name. Don't use mixed case unless there's meaning to it, right? So just keep everything lowercase. It's easier. Zero pad numbers, right? Don't do 1, do 001. If you're going to have under 1,000 subjects, which is probably true for your data, 001 for your first subject kind of thing, if you're going to do numerics like that. Don'ts, no spaces. Don't put spaces in file names. If you have a tool that puts spaces in file names, this is part of the automatic renaming process that you're going to do when you collect it in your SOP. Get rid of them. Name them much more like the do. Okay? Avoid special characters, right? Hard to manage depending on your software and so on. Don't use them. Okay, from NAR data, yes, Millar. So Millar is noting that sometimes there are ethical considerations for date and for the date and time of day. This is for the raw data, right? We're talking about to start. And if you have those ethical considerations, I would say that's when you handle it in curation, right? But the raw, that's important information that may impact downstream stuff and you don't want to lose. Right? The goal here about how a lot of these processes is to not lose information about the data collection you've done. But if you have those kinds of issues, then you handle it by anonymizing it or otherwise removing it in curation or decimating it or whatever you need to do on the curation side of things. So we've now collected, or we are all collecting fairly organized raw data. That's not what we do analysis on because we might have stuff here and stuff here and stuff here and stuff here from different sources. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to curate it. It should be our single source of truth for the study, that everybody is going to go and look in that same place and that everybody is going to get the same stuff from that place. Okay, conversion from proprietary and the raw formats, that's when you're going to do that there. Organization into standard formats if they're available, standardized formats. Merging into a single semi-long table. Right? So you've got a data table. It has rows for multiple measurements. So if you have a repeated measure on a subject, that's a new row. Columns correspond to whatever the measurement happens to be. Right? Nice structured data table. Anyone who's used R knows that's the way that R thinks about data. It's a wonderful way to think about data. It keeps it reasonably compressed, reasonably well documented, doesn't get huge, doesn't have lots of holes in it. Great way to do it. Do not do an ultra-wide table like REDCap gives you, where every new measurement is a new column and a new column and a new column and a new column and a new column, because that's really hard to handle when you go to actually do analysis. greatly facilitated by good data collection choices, as I said, right? If you do, it's easy to construct. If your raw data was constructed well, then you can just automatically create this kind of thing. This is when we perform quality control on our data. We do our outlier checks. We look at our imaging data. We rate stuff. It depends a lot on what the study is of what that exactly means. We log those. We don't throw away data. We note what stuff we consider good and bad, or gradations of good and bad. That is data about the study, because that somebody else might want to be able to reproduce the work, and you need to have that information available. That's data. The better the planning and organization of the raw data collection, more of that step can be automated. The more you can get curation just by writing a script to put everything together, to load this, to load that, to put it together and have the one output. Automation code should obviously live with this, right? That's an SOP. There's a set of instructions along with a piece of code that does the cleanup. Okay. 2, SOP should be developed for this, I just said. It could be one step or continuous. So if you have a study that's running for a long time, once you have at least some samples of the data you collect everywhere, that's enough for you to build this automation process for putting it together. It should be runnable such that it just regrabs the raw data, however much there is, and creates a new curated data set that's just updated, right? If it's a short study where you collect everything and then put it together, that's fine too. Okay? This is the place to perform manual corrections as well, right? And to log them, to write down exactly what it is that you did and why you did it if you need to manually correct your data. Document these changes. Consent is data, right? You might want to distribute stuff later. You need to be able to log all those consent values so that you can filter on it when you go to do publication of the data, so on and so forth. Especially when there's multiple consent levels, right? Who can I use for this study? Who can I distribute or use for other studies and so on? Don't make copies of this. So you've got your curated single source of data. If you need to fix it or update it or modify it, but someone has taken a copy and put it somewhere else, and they're using the copy, now we have the problem that that their version is becoming out of sync, right? So you need to keep track of that kind of thing. Because if there are multiple copies, who's the source of truth? Okay, storing and backup. So now, this is the computery side of things. Storage on external platforms is not the same thing as sharing. This is mostly a message to the ethics people. There's a difference between putting it on a storage system that is not directly in the hospital and actually doing sharing. You know the difference, right? If you use DRAC, the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, for your storage, you're not distributing it. The only people who can see it are you who have the access and the super powerful admins who are in charge of the system itself. And they better be trustworthy because they're managing multi-million-dollar equipment and everybody's data from all over Canada. So you have to have some level of accepting the computer manager people are going to be able to, in theory, see the data, but it would be very bad and fireable offense and all those things if they ever tried to. Okay. Self-management of data storage is hard. You probably shouldn't do it yourself. If you just have, SSDs or hard drives in your own computers, those things fail. I've had a failed SSD in the past month, and I have failed hard drives in the computer systems here all the time that we have to worry about managing. Lab managed RAID retires attention and trained staff. You can buy like a Synology or a Drobo or any of those things, but you have to check whether or not the drives are failing in it. You have to get a notification. You have to buy new drives. You have to go and physically install them and do all that stuff. Yes, Lonnie? Redundant array of disks. It is a way to have a big storage system where you have data distributed along with checksums or parity, so things that check whether or not there's been damage to data, distributed over a large amount of hard drives, so that if any individual drive fails, or depending on the configuration, some number of drives fails, the storage is still accessible, functional, and stable, and continues to work while you swap in replacement drives for the failures. Josh?
Is it necessary, in addition to RAID, is that sufficient, or do we also need to have a backup?
RAID is not backups. That's a separate thing. RAID is not backups. Backups are separate. Backups are a complete copy. That's a wonderful question. Like, so RAID makes sure that the data that you're working with is always accessible, but it's possible for that computer attached to the RAID array to die. And then the computer has to be rebuilt. And what happens in the meantime? Not accessible. Another thing is, what if the whole building burns down where that thing is installed? Well, it doesn't matter if the computer was designed to be fully redundant. There's not another copy of the data. The data's gone because it burned out. So backups are separate from redundancy control and an individual level for RAID. Manually copying data to multiple disks is what this is is logistically complicated and prone to mistakes. The hard drive in the file drawer is not a good backup solution because first of all, they can walk away, they can be dropped, they can fail anyways, they can be lost. Which one's the newest one? Is it up to date? Like you have to manage the backup thing and everything like that and all that. Like that's all complicated. Now you have to do a whole bunch of process and procedure, which is complicated. And rats can walk away. Okay. Access control should be monitored, like depending on like your storage choice and your ethics requirements and your legal requirements, you need to be able to control access. So you should be using a system that has the ability to control access. A hard drive sitting on a desk is not really controlled access, right? Unless it's behind many, many, many locked doors and so on, but how many people have access to the room, et cetera, et cetera. Use something like that. Platforms with managed storage are strongly recommended. There's options around here. Obviously, Digital Research Alliance of Canada has project storage, which you can apply for. They have tape storage for long-term that you can also apply for. And then finally, DNP also offers storage at competitive rates that has both RAID and backup. That's the important thing for that. Cindy. So if the question from Cindy is, what is tape storage? So if you know that you want to store data and probably never touch it again, or if you need to touch it, you need to get all of it all at once and you don't need to like poke at it, right? You're not looking for a small piece, you want to recover all of it. The cheapest way to store data is on tape. It's a magnetic tape thing that it has a single spool in the middle of it, and you can store 50 or 60 terabytes in a tape, more with compression, and which isn't that much when you consider some of your studies. But the trick is what they can do there as well in these systems is at DRAC, what they have is literally a room this size full of tapes in bays on the wall, robotic arms, and multiple tape drives. And so literally a machine will come and pick the tape out, stick it in the machine, and high speed reading or writing, but you can't find an individual file easily. You have to do it all. You know, the 50 terabytes or 60 terabytes comes off the tape all at once. So we don't use it anymore, a tape drive that had 20 bays and a robot and 2 drives. The problem is that it was only 4 or 5 terabyte tapes, which wasn't enough to actually keep up with our data production. So now we just do the mirroring for our backups instead. It's expensive to keep up with the new technology of tapes, unfortunately. And so a place like DRAC, who has like literally a room full of it, can keep up with that, of upgrading the drives, buying new tapes and putting them in and everything. It uses this, barcode scanner and picks it up and does a bunch of cool stuff. You can find a video later of that stuff. Okay, storing data again. You probably don't need a database. There are databases underlying a lot of the data collection software that you might use, and that's good. You just get it for free. You probably don't need to actually create a database for your individual study. File storage is probably fine. You don't have a million rows. They're good for querying stuff from huge, huge pieces of data, right? But if you can fit in RAM, which most of your data can fit in RAM, you don't need to worry about a database, okay? This is different from a platform where you may collect data. So, CoBrA, they have databases underneath it, but you don't need to worry about that part because you're just using the platform as is. If you really need a database, SQLite is the solution for that. It's actually a database in a single file. That works quite well if you need to randomly query. I've used it exactly once in my 11 years here doing data management, that I've created a database for a data set because I absolutely had to do it. Use vendor and version independent formats. So don't use something that depends on specific versions of things. It's obvious, but like not everybody would have come across this. Okay, so CSV and TSV are A-OK. Those are good choices. TSV is great. You be careful about escaping fields. So think about if you have qualitative data like Matt was talking about, where there might be a comma. Now you have to worry about, like, because you were indexing, you're actually writing down what somebody said, and you have a comma in there. Now you have to worry about whether the CSV is going to handle that properly because the software might do it. You either have to quote the fields or escape the field and so on. That's why TSV is really great, because no one is intentionally typing a tab, right? So it's a great way to separate fields. So TSV is actually preferred to CSV, but they're both okay. They're open, they're readily readable by everything. Okay. Be aware of Excel, LibreOffice converting things. So like reading a number and thinking it's a date, reading a date and converting it to a different date. These tools are trying to be helpful, but they're not designed for scientific data. They're designed for business. So be aware. Consider editing, if you need to edit your data, with a plain text editor, Notepad, Nano, Vim, Kate, any number of those things, which don't interpret, they only directly edit. If you have to modify a CSV or TSV. Okay, use more performance stuff with Parquet, Arrow, HDF5 if you have bigger stuff that's like imaging or something. Don't use Pickle or RData or RDS for your long-term storage things. These are version dependent. They are specific to to individual platforms. And so you can run into problems where you save something and now you need Python from 20 years ago to load the data again because you pickled your data set, your data structure. So don't do that. Use something open. And use compression if you can. Compress the, turn on compression wherever it's available because it makes things small. And it makes things faster if you have it compressed. Okay. File names and directory are enough. Don't use spaces tab. We already talked that. Manage who has read and write access to the raw and curated data. So when you put things together, does everybody need to be able to see that in the research group, or can it only be the person who's managing it, or some smaller group, or is it only a data manager? So if you use Linux, the standard stuff that we're doing, you can easily control the permissions yourself for all of these things. And then you can actually assign multiple levels of permissions to individual people. You can share selectively and so on. Okay, track who has access. That means somebody is in charge as well, right? By definition, if you have to track and control, that means somebody's in charge. Okay, documentation. Use published standards wherever possible, then somebody has already written the docs for you. If you say, I am storing in this format where this format is standardized and shared and everybody already uses it, boom, no more docs to write about what's actually stored inside the file because it's already there. Just refer to the documentation. Okay. Good naming schemes are self-documenting. Age in weeks is a great name for a field because you know it's a numeric and you know what the value means, right? So instead of saying age, what's the units of age? Okay. Store plain explanatory documents with it. That's the README and the changelog. These are the notes you're taking about, like, if you were going to inherit this data from someone else, what are the things you would want to be told about it in terms of how should you think about its structure, its study, all those things, and then what was done to it. So this is why we have the single source of truth, because the changelog says, version 1, this was the initial thing. Version 2, I had to fix X, Y, and Z because there were these mistakes in my initial implementation, right? So you see what changed. Think about what you would need. And you in the future is a different person. Unless you have an eidetic memory, which I'm not sure anybody here does, you in the future are going to go back to the things that you wrote when you put this together, and they're going to tell you what it is that you did. So it's really important. Okay, the cloud and LLMs and AI tools, the last thing for recommendations here. The cloud is someone else's computer, right? That's what that means. So that means the legal and ethical things apply. Who's in charge? What are the rules regarding it and everything like that? If you're going to put data there, actually for processing or for storage, you need to understand those implications. That's why there's kind of pre-approved or already like computing resources, which are already set up for handling things ethically and within the context of the research we do. Okay. Might be used to train or monetize your data. You have to check a look at the terms and conditions of things like that for analysis. LLM and AI tools use the data to train. right? You're disclosing things if you're going to copy and paste some data from your CSV into Gemini or Claude or whatever it happens to be to ask a question. So is that allowed? According to the ethics, like for mouse data, sure. Human data, probably not, right? You have to check your ethics on that. And very, very soon there will be chat DNP here, which is LLMs hosted entirely internally on servers we control using open AI tools. And so those will allow you to actually put data in without disclosing it outside of the hospital. Okay, now we'll get to some worked examples. Care of Cian.
Thanks, Gabe. So yeah, I'm going to just go through some kind of how you would actually implement a DMP or what that might look like. First, a shameless plug. We're at the DMP here can check most of these boxes with a subscription. We can check all the boxes. With a subscription, you can get storage. We provide backup, access control. It's all here at the Douglas, managed by people with technical expertise who can do it properly. There's more information on our website if you need to contact us there. We have two platforms as well that are kind of help with this system. So OpenDataCapture is a structured collection which already has a lot of forms up there already. It provides validation, which is important, like Gabe mentioned, and it's easy to get data back out because it's all exported in open formats. DataBank is another tool that we provide, which helps you share your data in an open way, or you can have a restricted subset if you want to share. So moving on to how we implement stuff. So one of the ways that this is thought about is the FAIR principles, which is findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse of your data or digital assets. So findability refers to, is your data or code easy to find? So somewhere like you can put your code up on GitHub or CoBrA or something like that. For your data, if you have imaging, you can put it up on OpenNeuro, or if you have other types of data, you can upload it to Zenodo. So these are repositories. If you have metadata, you have like a NeuroBagel, which would be like an index of all these different types of metadata that you can search through. So it's a good way to kind of advertise your data or your code or your data sets. Accessibility. So if you have uploaded some data to, Zenodo, you get a DOI, which means your data is really easy to share. You can just send somebody the link, they get it. Same with something like GitHub, you can just share a link to your GitHub repo on your repository, and then it's easy for someone else to access it. So interoperability, this is where having your data in open formats is something that you really need to think about, because if your data is locked behind software that requires a license, people are not necessarily going to be able to use it. So BIDS is a great way to think about this, because then it allows other people to reuse it, which is the last step. So if you have your imaging data in a BIDS format, you can use BIDS apps. These are just like a bunch of apps that take a BIDS data set and do processing on it. There's pipelining tools available for neuroimaging, like NiPoppy or NF-Core if you're doing more bioinformatics stuff. Having clear licenses for your data ensures that people know exactly what they can and can't do with your data. So this would be, for your data, you can think about like the Creative Commons licenses, or for code, like the MIT or the GPL. There's a whole bunch of them that are, you can have a look through yourself. The Creative Commons has a tool called the Chooser, which helps you go through and figure out exactly what license you should be using if you want to go that route. So what is BIDS? This is just a way to think about your data. It's actually quite simple in theory. It's just a set of directories and files. So if you had a data set called My Project, you have a subject, there's a session, there's some scans just in these directories. There's also tools to validate your BIDS set so that you know it's correct. So for an actual data, well, this is a toy data set that I created, but you can see there's metadata up at the top level. You've got the data set description, the participants, And then you have your first subject with, you know, your ANAT scans, your functional scans, and your diffusion data. And along with these scans, you can see there's the metadata in the .json files, and you can see that all the file names, they're very, there's a schema applied to them. So they're all the same. They're not the same, but they're all structured in the same way. So I don't know if you can actually read this, but unfortunately the resolution's not great, but there's a lot wrong with this. Does anybody want to shout anything out?
They're all named the same.
Nifties aren't zipped. The name of the Nifty is just T1, which is not helpful. Yep. It is. Yes. So they could refer to the same subject, but they're seen. Yeah. So yeah, the directory structure is different. It's inconsistent. There's the metadata is the wrong format. It's the wrong names across everything. We've got an Excel sheet down here, which is not great either. There's missing metadata. It's just not a great way to do things. It's going to make everything harder downstream. Here's another file that has some issues in it. If anybody wants to shout those out.
The dates are dumb.
They are. Maybe it was imported to Excel. We're not sure. The weights are all over the place. There's a -9999.
Yeah, is that 154?
Yeah. So the weights, what's the unit? It's probably pounds, maybe it's kilos, who knows? The age, it's probably years, but maybe it's, I don't know, months. The sex, there's male, female, or MF, and then a 1. You just have to remember which one the 1 corresponds to. The scan date, like was mentioned, is completely unusable in the way it is now. For the diagnosis, there's missing values. There's ALS versus Alzheimer's. It's not a great way to do things.
The ID is.
Sorry?
The ID.
The ID? The ID is not great, like I mentioned, because it's just a number rather than an alphanumeric.
Everything's wrong.
Everything's wrong, yeah.
You laugh. We've seen that.
This is how we get data sometimes. This is all built from personal experiences in the DMP.
The composite is the same exactly.
This is composite. This is composite. So I'll go over quickly some of the pitfalls. We've seen most of them already. So using formats that are proprietary is an issue. It, again, limits other people's ability to reuse data, especially if it's tied to some piece of software that has a license requirement that's expensive. Not having a schema, these are all different, even though they kind of refer to the same thing and can cause issues with parsing later on. Being inconsistent with naming. So these might refer to the same subject, but a lot of software will see these as 2 separate subjects, even though they're both subject 1. Losing the provenance of your data. So if you've inherited some files, but you don't know what happened to them beforehand, was there any kind of pre-processing done? Not knowing that is a problem. Not having metadata, not having a backup, your lab might flood. You could lose. Not documenting software versions. So again, if you do end up pickling your stuff, what version of Python do you need specifically to unpickle that? Analyses might not be reproducible without the exact steps taken to get to those results, which again kind of ties into version control, which I'm sure all of you have encountered this in some shape or form.
This probably Google Docs saved this from this.
Yeah, maybe pre-Google Docs.
Yeah, the pre-Google Docs.
Yeah.
Word experience.
So I'll just go over quickly a checklist. So you want your naming schema defined, you want your directory and file structure, backup plan, make sure you have all your metadata, where it's going to be for how long. Make sure to document and use scripts to do your data analysis so it's reproducible. Use version control, use open file formats, and make sure you've establish consent and ethics. If you plan to share your data later, make sure that the consent reflects that, and who has access to your data to make sure that nobody who doesn't have it, shouldn't have it, doesn't have it. So if we wanted to kind of take a hypothetical imaging project, you have an experimental plan, you want to see control versus disease, you think it's going to cause X change. Let's run a DBM workflow on a cross-sectional population. You have 20 controls, 20 disease subjects. So let's define a subject naming schema, sub C01 and sub D01. You don't need a whole bunch of padding there because you only have 20 subjects of each in each group. We're going to store our data set here on the DMP servers, so that takes care of backup. We've got our raw DICOMs also saved in that, so if we ever need to go back, we can do that. We're using NiPoppy to bidsify our data set structure, so that whole file naming and directory naming structure is taken care of. We'll do the pre-processing and DBM via run scripts, which will be up in a GitHub repo, so if we make any changes, we can have version control there. And then we'll also report any software version as metadata. And then finally, we'll upload our derivatives to OpenNeuro so that it's shareable. So this checks all our checkboxes. So everything's green. That's great. So this is where I used to work. We used to keep all of our kind of data using an ELN, which is proprietary software that got discontinued. So that meant getting stuff out of that was exceedingly difficult. So we ended up developing our own way of kind of storing data. We were running a fee-for-service lab. So people would come in, they wanted X, Y, or Z metabolites in their blood samples or whatever, and we process it and give it to them. So we developed our own file and directory structure, which is pretty straightforward. Just you had your samples, you had your analysis type with an internal ID for us, and then a date and a descriptor for whatever analysis you were doing. Within those directories, we had a bunch of files, which is our metadata and our raw data, and then also our reports that we would send to the clients. The data was on a network drive, which was managed by MedIT, so that took care of our backups. So we did pretty well without actively chasing any of our checklists. We didn't have any kind of version control, and we were using proprietary data analysis software. So that's for most of the analyses. So that's one place we could have improved on. NiPoppy has generated this lovely image that kind of talks about running through an analysis once with inherited data and all the problems that we've kind of discussed here with bad practices. The demographics, there's 2 different files there. The actual file itself is all over the place like we saw ourselves. That's great. You spend a year going through cleaning that all up, and then you get asked to do it again with a different data set. So hopefully their data set was in bids or something, so you can just run your analysis straight easily, but probably it wasn't. So in conclusion, it's more than just paperwork. Thinking about this beforehand really helps you downstream on analysis. It allows you to share data easier with collaborators or whoever else, or if you want to run a different pipeline on your data at the end to try and get another publication. You've worked hard on collecting the data, so it makes sense to put in a little bit of effort and get this right. It's going to be a lot easier on you down the line. So yeah, DNP can help with all of these issues. Thank you. One question.
Well, we had questions during. Is there
Yeah.
anybody online who's had any questions?
No, there was just a comment.
One comment, okay.
Rebecca.
Yes.
If the participant consent and are fully informed, it's possible we put that on LLM tools.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a function. So the thing is that this is new, right? So it's likely right now all of the consents that don't list that. and you have to be concerned about what I would aim for not putting any of that data into LLMs unless there's been explicit consent done, because it is technically disclosure, right? If you look at the terms and service of any of the publicly available LLM systems. And so in the case of the DNP, it's not. Because, well, we do keep logs to see what people are doing. We throw them all away and we don't train on anything. We're just providing open internal tools. So any questions here? Cool. Thank you very much. I hope you found this useful and informative. And if you need any assistance in any of the things we've covered here, feel free to contact us. Thanks again.